Comrade Leader, when we talk about Linden, Forbes, Sampson, the man, we've got to be able to allow our viewers to note too that it was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham that we had the co-op system established.
Guyanese need to know. Burnham was so serious about housing that Burnham set up what was called Guyana Housing Corporation. The scheme that is called GuyHoc is really the abbreviation for Guyana Housing Corporation. Let me say this. The most persons trained on scholarships in this country was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. As a poor country, Burnham in the 70s gave $50,000 to the liberation movement. It was criticized by Dr. Jagan. A lot of people seem not to know that Festival City got its name because Burnham built those houses for Guyanese, but before Guyanese moved into them, it housed the people who came for Curry Fest.
Help me welcome Comrade Leader as we start the conversation on Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham, and who is this man?
You're hearing me?
Here he is. We are hearing you a little bit. We're hearing you. So good evening to you, Comrade Leader, and welcome to Advancing the Cause. I really like the green that you have on there, right? I think it's green. I really like it. But we're going to be talking this evening. I know that you're not a stranger to this program, but we're going to be talking about the man, Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. I know many persons. He died in 1985. Many who we are here rambling and rattling off all kinds of craziness. They don't know anything about this man, but they're just parroting some of what they're hearing, some of the hypocrites saying about Burnham. But we'd be happy for you to share with us a little bit about LFS Burnham. Who is this guy? Tell us who this guy is.
Well, he clearly was one of the most brilliant Guyanese ever. Burnham was very eloquent. When you listen to Burnham, you generally will be moved by his speech. He had an unparalleled command of the English language. But most important to me is that he had a vision for Guyana. And his vision was not personalized. It wasn't about amassing wealth. His vision was really to ensure that there was justice, economic development, and our people living peacefully together. Forbes Burnham believed and actually said that education is the foundation of any nation, that education is critical to emancipation. And so a lot of his policies and programs were aimed at developing people educationally. Burnham had a kind of a disdain for the elitist approach to the world. He did a lot to ensure all Guyanese can benefit from what Guyana has. A lot of persons who don't like him didn't like him because he removed a lot of the social barriers. As a boy growing up in Linden, I always remember that you had to get permission to visit Watuka, where the expatriates live. And Burnham dismantled that. There was a time when to teach in a school, You had to be part of the church because you had church schools. Burnham dismantled that. You had to be a certain complexion to get to work, and here meaning fair-head into white, to get to work in a bank. Again, Burnham dismantled that. Burnham basically wanted to see a society in which all had opportunities and all were treated equally. And I think he fought assiduously to ensure that happened.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I know that LFS Burnham served. He was an attorney. He served as Minister of Education. He served as Prime Minister. He served as President. I think he was also a teacher. Um,
He was also
LF,
mayor of Georgetown.
he was also mayor of Georgetown. You see, and so this man that we're talking about, and that many people fail to want to recognize and to give honor to. This man was a rounded man. And when we look at some of the politicians and some of the, well, when we look at some of the ministers that we have now who want to talk, I'll say all kinds of crazy things. Some of them can't even fit halfway where this man would have walked. And
But
so,
there's something you must understand about those, particularly like Ashley Singh. Whenever he cannot deliver on a budget and and he is in trouble in terms of arguments to support his budget, etc., he resorts to abusing and cussing Burnham, though he knows very little about Burnham. But, it's par for the course in politics. But it is our task to ensure people know the truth about Burnham. Burnham, like any human being, made mistakes, errors. But like I've always said, you cannot accuse him of exploiting people and amassing wealth at the expense of people. And so in that regard, Burnham is way ahead of the leaders in this country.
Comrade Leader, I read just a couple of minutes ago, I read um, just a little excerpt from one of Burnham's speech where he said, "A nation is not built. A nation is not built. A nation is not built by the wealth of a few, but by discipline, sacrifice, and commitment of all." I think I got something mixed up there, but I am sure the operator will put it up there for us. When we listen to this man talking like that, right away it brings to mind patriotism, which is absent today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about LFS Burnham, his political and constitutional achievements?
Before you get there, you have to understand the context in which Burnham emerged. Burnham came back from England at a time when the anti-colonial struggle was ongoing. He became involved in the anti-colonial struggle both at home and abroad. He played a significant role in terms of African liberation. When Burnham came to power, he came to power after Guyana found itself in 3 years of ethnic violence under the PPP, who governed Guyana between 1961 and 1964. Once Burnham came to power, it must be recalled that from the inception, the People's Progressive Party carried out a vicious campaign against Burnham. One of the first things the PPP did was to tell people not to put their money in the post office. Take it out and put it in the two banks he had mentioned was Barclays Bank and Bank of Baroda, two foreign banks, which suggested that he didn't have the patriotism that was required. And so, apart from this economic sabotage, they also became involved in very violent attacks against people who didn't support the People's Progressive Party. What is happening now is modest by those standards, because in those days, they actually killed people who opposed them. I always remember the case where the PPP killed Akbar Ali because Akbar Ali had decided that he was through with them. And when I think it was Zaruhuddin who left the PPP came, he also pointed out that the PPP was very racist in nature, and therefore he left. In that period, I think a number of persons left. You had Robert Adams, you have Bowman, who was PPP founder member, and he left. You had George Henry, and you had Zahuruddin. You had another man named Safi. And all of those who came from inside the PPP said openly that the party was one racist and the party was carrying out a campaign of violence against the government. And whenever we talk about Burnham, we have to begin by understanding that from the outset, he didn't have it easy. He was fighting at the domestic level, the PPP, and at the international level, Venezuela had made a claim against Guyana in 1962. And so by the time he came to power in 1964, he was dealing with this Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. So Burnham had significant opposition both overseas and at home, not to
And
forget
at home.
Suriname. Now, it is in that context that Burnham began to strategize and to outline the position for Guyana. Burnham, for instance, felt that we had to deal with the race problem. And so he appointed Winifred Gaskin, Minister of Education and Race Relations. And for those who know the era, Winifred Gaskin, Burnham, and others moved across Guyana, preaching national unity and healing the wounds that were created by the violence of the PPP in the 60s, particularly 61 to 1964. A lot of times when people talk, they forget that. You had to face economic sabotage, where the PPP used to burn sugarcane. So even as you try to up your production, you had to live with the sabotage of sugarcane. You had to live with the burning of schools, etc. So Burnham didn't have an easy time. But amidst that, he outlined clear policies. And I believe one of the most fundamental things about Burnham is that he focused on building institutions. I always mention NIS, where he, in a very structured way, developed a social security system that will help workers. I made the point recently that when NIS emerged, the PPP called it sin. But, and, so one has to recognize that he built institutions. In agriculture, he had the, I put down the exact name. I just want to get it so that I don't miss it. But it is something like the Agriculture Co-op Credit Bank before the Guyana Agricultural Development Bank. And that facility gave farmers significant help. I want to point out some of the things that happened. Burnham had a crop bonus scheme. Remember when Burnham came to power, we were importing bora, cabbage, everything. And he had launched a food program. People only focus on feed out and clothe yourself by 1976. But from the inception, he established a food program, an agricultural program to produce food. And he delivered crop bonuses to anybody who got into the coconut industry, the black eye industry, the vegetable industry, especially cabbage. People forget that he championed the egg and vegetable production program at Bachelor's Adventure and many other schemes across the country that resulted in increased agricultural production. He established what was called a National Tree Planting Week, where people were given plants free of cost to plant. He opened significant lands for agriculture on the Soesdijk Linden Highway. You had in Port Kaitumo. People tend to forget that there was a time when Port Kaitumo produced the vegetables, etc., that they needed. And we could go to Fort Kaituma, Matthews, which many of those areas. He expanded agricultural production outside of the coast into hinterland areas and ensured food security for the people of Guyana. I recall from going back through some documentation that farmers were given $150 per acre for bitter cassava to increase its production. Other crops got $50. Now it might sound small to you now,
But
$150,
it was a lot of
but
money then.
in today's terms, it's going to be thousands. But the point is, his programs were people-centered. He did things to empower people and allow a lot of people to develop. Many of the farmers that existed in this country became successful as a result of Burnham's approach to agriculture. And the Guy Bank came a little later, but even before that, he had a number of incentives and measures that resulted in increased agricultural production and ensuring food security in Guyana. It's a shame that we now have to go to the market and see foreign tangerine, foreign bananas,
Uh-huh.
foreign mangoes.
Avocado pear.
The reality is this present government has failed in terms of agriculture. The agricultural base that Burnham put and left has been virtually diminished, if not destroyed. And so we have to see Burnham in this context as a builder, as a man who put state resources into empowering people, into improving the country and reducing its vulnerabilities. And when you look at it, people forget when they talk about an ombudsman. And that's why I said he left an institution. I mean, the government of Guyana has miniaturized the role of the ombudsman. But we were the first country, I think, in the Commonwealth, if not in the world, to have an ombudsman. And for those who don't know, an ombudsman was appointed, and if you had any problem with the government services, etc., you could have applied to the ombudsman and have an investigation. I think the last ombudsman investigation I heard about here was when Justice Moore was asked to investigate the New Building Society problem. And when he finished and he ruled that the government was out of place, I don't think we heard of the ombudsman
That
after
was the
that.
end of it.
But
That
the
was the end of it.
ombudsman was a key institution where, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your social status, you could have applied for redress against the state. So,
But I think, comrade leader, you missed a couple there. I think you're trying to get all of them there. When we look at agriculture, and I have to bring this in, agriculture for the PPP is black belly sheep, sugarcane, and catfish. But agriculture on the LFS Burnham, you talked about the coconut farm, you talked about what happened in the hinterland, and we should point out that in the hinterland we exported canned food.
well, before we go there, if you went to the Rupununi Junior Burnham era, it was a gem traveling and see the cattle ranches, most of which have disappeared. We brought beef out of the interior for Guyanese people. Now we are importing beef and calling it development. As a result of Burnham's agricultural push, people forget that we can pineapples. At one stage, we did mango juice. Young people wouldn't know about Guyana canning industry, where we Guyanese canned a lot of things. And it was deliberate policy. Burnham always said, let us increase the agricultural production. The excess production could be canned or exported. Another time when we have the time, I will go through the documentation to show you from 1964, with the coming of the PNC government, that the percentage of local production to imported increased significantly, and that we had reduced importation. In fact, people are critical of Burnham's import substitution program without going to the essence of it. I mentioned salted fish recently. Burnham felt that, look, we had fish, we had salt, we had people, we had sun. Why are we spending our foreign exchange importing saltfish? And he restricted it. And he invested in the people of Guyana, who developed a saltfish industry that is earning for us overseas. And the PPP cannot talk about discrimination here because all Guyanese were trained. And so he had a vision which said essentially, yes, there are things that we need from overseas, but there are some non-essential ones we need not fight with when we could produce it at home. And so when I say he created institutions, I mean it wasn't programs and projects that just appear for a little bit and disappear. They became institutionalized in the society. In the case of salted fish, it became an industry by itself that began to export. The same is true with pineapples. And so you're talking about a man who had a clear vision for Guyana, a Guyana in which you produce most of the food you need, and then you move in the direction of manufacturing and industrializing to be able to process those. People forget that it is Burnham that set up NARI, the National Agricultural Research Institute.
I was going to come to that.
And in that period in agriculture in Guyana, we did significant research on how to control pesticides, insecticides, etc. And we were very successful under Burnham in terms of doing that. But again, all of this would have gone through the window. All the PPP tell you about is the size of the budget. It doesn't tell you the outcomes. And I'm saying to you, the outcomes in terms of agriculture under Forbes Burnham were very, very significant. And that other crops outside of rice, sugar, other crops became an industry by itself and contributed significantly to the development of Guyana. And the man that should be credited for creating an other crops sector that helped us significantly and can continue to help us if the government do the right thing, that man is Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham.
Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. But you know, comrade leader, as we talk about agriculture and the economic programs that LFS Burnham would have instituted, coming to mind right away is the MMA ADA scheme. And you know, these are the things that the PPP will never talk about. But it was Burnham whose initiative it was. And then we had this strengthening of the irrigation system or irrigation projects in Blackbush Polder. Maybe you might want to tell us a little about that, the Blackbush Polder and Burusi.
If I recall, Blackbush Polder is significant. If I recall, it started under Dr. Jagan. I will double check it. But whether it started or not under Dr. Jagan, and if it did, you should be given credit for it. But the reality is, Burnham didn't take the childish approach of the PPP of disbanding everything that came from the PNC. Burnham took the approach that a project like Blackbush Polder is good for Guyana. And he contributed to ensuring it was expanded. I will double check to see. I don't think I recall that it might have started under the PPP. And I don't like taking credit for things that others would have done. But the significance of Black Bush Polar is even if it started under Dr. Jagan, Burnham continued it, improved it, and didn't become involved in some vindictive schemes. I don't believe the government or the PPP can show any project that was useful, I'm talking about that was useless, that was useful under the PPP that Burnham didn't continue. And when we talk about agriculture, people must remember it is Burnham that introduced duty-free for agricultural machinery, fertilizers, weedicides, all those things. A lot of the things that were related to agriculture, it was Burnham who ensured they have duty-free concession so that people can access them and use them for the development of Guyana. And so one has to really and truly catalog, the process of cataloging the many things that Burnham did. We ain't got to catalog what they consider to be the negatives. They spend all their time doing that. So we have to put out the positives of Forbes Burnham. And when we put it out, it will be clear to everyone. Burnham, when University Ghana was established, it was established under the People's Progressive Party. But Burnham didn't abandon it. Burnham, in fact, built Turkine campus. Whenever we talk about university education and Turkine, this is a campus that was built by Forbes Burnham for a program started by the PPP. He expanded it. And I'm showing this again to show you the maturity of the man. This was a man who, yes, there's no doubt that he was critical of it when it started, and he had good reasons to criticize it. But he thought that, the criticisms apart, it had used value. And so what he did was to improve on it, ensure that it got a proper campus, so that today we talk about Turkine and people forget that Turkine was built by Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. And we need to point that out. And that has to be pointed out in the context of free education at the university level. Because once he built Turkine and he started to expand the program, in 1976, he brought free education from nursery to university. And when the PPP jumping around like if they brought free university education, they must be reminded that it is they who stopped it in 1994 and institute fee paying, and then for political purposes and pressure from us, they reintroduced it. But the whole concept of free education at the university level is a concept developed and implemented by Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham.
So Comrade Leader, as we talk about education and Burnham expanding education reform and its expansion, it is important to note as well, and we have to keep sounding this alarm, that it was Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham who instituted free education from nursery to university, like you said just now. And we have to keep sounding this alarm and ringing the bell, because we're having now, I just heard one of the PPP's MP, none other than James Bond, who was praising the PPP for free education and granting him the opportunity. If you don't know, just don't say anything. But we must ensure that you're well aware, you're knowledgeable about things before you talk. We had free education then under the PNC. And like you said, it was the PPP who added a price to free education. And we know why they did that, because they did not want to have ordinary people having higher education. They wanted you to stay Like my one of my colleague, a former colleague, used to say, mentally lazy so that they can control you. But we need to point out as well that it was LFS Burnham who extended the primary and secondary education program, where he built the multilateral schools and the community high schools. And I'm sure there was a reason for doing that.
You know, when it comes to things like education, James Bond doesn't have the sapience for us to discuss him. So I won't want to discuss James Bond. He lacks the sapience to
I
discuss.
just thought I should mention that
But
about the free
I want
education.
to say a few things about education. When Burnham came to power in 1964, outside of the private and church schools, there were 13 secondary schools in this country. It was Forbes Burnham who began to build secondary schools in rural areas, in the hinterland.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time he died, across this country, poor people, children had access to secondary education. And so all the nonsense they are talking, when you go to the facts, it will be clearly established that it is Burnham that created a network of secondary schools in this country. The PPP might have built some after, but we inherited from the PPP in 1964 a situation where our rural children did not have access to secondary school in their communities. They would have had to come to either QC or Bishops, or in the case of Linden, to Mackenzie High School, wherever. But Burnham, in a very structured way, began to build secondary schools across this country outside. In fact, if I remember the figures correctly, the first 14 that were built, only 2 of them were in Georgetown and Linden. Most of them were in rural areas so that its children can access them. And this is before the multilateral, which will come after. And a lot of people miss the concept of the multilateral. Burnham's intention, Burnham recognized that there were some people who had skills with their hand. They were technically good. There are those who were going to be academic. And the multilateral school was intended to like bridge the gap. You could have academia if you were academic oriented, but all of those schools were built with facilities for technical and vocational training. And so people who didn't have the high level academics, for the want of a better phrase, could have had an alternative in the multilateral school. And today, when one sees the need for technical people, one must be happy over the fact that Burnham focused significantly on technical education and expanded it out of Georgetown. Outside of Gaisuko and and Denver in Linden, it was the Technical Institute in New Amsterdam and those things that Burnham became involved in that helped to expand technical and vocational training. So he was somebody who focused on bettering the lives of the ordinary man. In fact, to use his own words, he wanted the ordinary man to be the real man, or the small man to be the real man.
And while we're at that, Chief, I just needed to let our folks know that we had 2 residential hinterland schools that were built under the PNC, St. Ignatius Secondary and Mabaruma. And so when we hear the PPP talk about, oh, we're putting derms in schools and we're building schools here, and we need to let the facts must be out there. And so Sonia and Ashni Singh and all the host of them must understand that it was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham that we had these schools built. And the first residential schools that were built in the hinterland. And this just goes to show that all the talks we hear about Burnham being a racist and Burnham being this and Burnham being that, Burnham was a man for the people.
Well, I don't fight when they talk about Burnham being a racist, because when you look at the policies of Burnham, you will see they serve all the people of Guyana. Hinterland development was a policy advocated by Burnham. When Burnham came to power, our indigenous people were isolated in the hinterland. The Catholics played a meaningful role in their education at the time. But it was Forbes Burnham who opened the hinterland, build roads, etc.,
Yep.
and create the opportunity for the hinterland to develop. Let me make a point that people seem not to want to know. When we were going to independence, Burnham insisted that we have to look at the indigenous people. And an addendum to the agreement about independence was the establishment of an Amerindian Commission, which Burnham had established, surveyed the lands, and began the process of ensuring Amerindians got title. The PPP talks a lot of garbage now, but that is a process commenced by Burnham, and on the height others got. So we have got to be in the forefront of letting people know what Forbes Burnham did. I mentioned at the reclaim ceremony that if you didn't have a certain height, you could not be in the police force. And it was felt at the time that the law excluded essentially Amerindians and Indo-Guyanese. And it is Burnham who changed that law and removed the height restriction, so that you even see some extra small size in the police force and the Guyana Defense Force, because he felt you couldn't, in a multi-ethnic society in which indigenous people were generally short, you couldn't in such a society have a height barrier. It meant almost axiomatically that you were excluding particular groups. And when Burnham made that change, I don't think it was made for Afro-Guyanese. It was made for all Guyanese who had the ability but lacked the height. And so all of these things we need to focus on. That hinterland development program, people who travel to the Rupununi now by road, however bad it was, must know that there was a time that you couldn't get there by road. And Burnham saw the importance of the hinterland and not only began to open roads, he also put agricultural projects in Matthews Ridge, in Port Kaitumo, in Mabarumo, the Suzdijk Linden Highway, just to name a few, Tapakuma, in Essequibo, among others. So here was a man who was bent on building Guyana and not destroying it.
And so we had there, because of how we respected especially our indigenous people, our international airport was named the Timeri International Airport. And when you hear the PPP talk about putting people first, you're putting people first and you're taking off a name that was named after one of the group of people, one group of people in this country. You would have removed their name and you're now idolizing a person or some persons. And they might want to talk about, there are places that were named after LFS Burnham and they were this and they were that. But the thing is, there was never any place that was named by any of our ethnic group that Burnham removed the name from. And so our viewers, we want you to understand that LFS Burnham, the man, was a people's person. He was patriotic to heart. And we cannot take that away from him. When we look at what LFS Burnham did in terms of spearheading our country's largest housing project. Not like what we're having now. You have a housing scheme and there's no water and there's no road and there's no electricity, but they send you go and they go and live.
No,
When we
but
talk about, go right
correctly,
ahead.
we have to deal with this carefully. It is not just housing schemes. When Burnham, first of all, Burnham set up a mortgage finance bank, Guyana Mortgage Finance Bank, that gave extremely low interest rates to poor people so they could build houses. First thing. Second thing, Burnham didn't give people house lots. Burnham built houses. And mind you, he built houses at a time when we didn't have oil money, at a time when the PPP sabotaging the economy. But his commitment to people, and there is no region that I can recall in which he didn't build houses. Whether it's New Amsterdam, Region 6, Region 5, Region 4, Region 3, you can go and see housing schemes that were built by Burnham, and people went into them and then paid for them through a process.
And they're still standing. And they're still standing.
In fact, many of them have been improved. South Rheinveld has been improved considerably by the occupants there. There were two styles of houses, if I recall. You know, look, Guyanese need to know. Burnham was so serious about housing that Burnham set up what was called Guyana Housing Corporation. The scheme that is called GuyHoc is really the abbreviation for Guyana Housing Corporation. And the houses that were built by Guyana Housing Corporation were two sets, if I recall at the time. The one by Tocqueville and the one on Mandela Avenue. One I think is GuyHoc Gardens and one is GuyHoc Park. He developed a company to build houses for the people of Guyana and put them in it. And so when people talking, I see now after we talk about doing it, the PPP said they're going to do it. The problem you're going to have is quality, because for them everything is money.
Everything is
family,
money.
friends, and favorites. But we must acknowledge and always make the point that at a time when many Guyanese could not afford a house, Forbes, Burnham, and Bartik, and New Amsterdam, you name it, built houses for the people of Guyana, and they moved in and paid for it after. And that is significant. How could you, a budget allocates resources. And here was a man who allocated significant resources to building houses for the people at a time when we didn't have much resources. They can try to bastardize him as much as they can. Let me say this. The most persons trained on scholarships in this country was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham.
You're saying that
across the country.
You were saying that Barrett Jack there was a recipient too?
He might have had a party scholarship, I'm not so sure. But I know when he came back, he worked with state planning. But the point is, you had a structured scholarship program that the average person could have accessed. Even though when Burnham made UG free, there were still a lot of people who could not afford to go to the university, and they were given scholarships. And you know, when I hear they talk about you have to have a party card to get a scholarship, it's a lot of garbage. Many people got scholarships that didn't have a party card. And so we must stress this fact that apart from free education from nursery to university, he in a very structured way developed a scholarship program so that people can access it. No lawyer on the Burnham, or no person with the ability and have the potential on the Burnham to become a lawyer was deprived of a scholarship. They got scholarships and they did law first here and then in the Caribbean. So I ignore a lot of the garbage that is said. When I saw Freddie Kissoon talking, you know, I really wouldn't respond to Freddie. It doesn't worth a response because the record will speak for itself.
For itself.
And you can hate a man how much. You can't change the fact that you yourself benefited from what he did. And here I'm talking about Freddie Kissoon.
Maybe
and that his policies and programs were aimed at promoting and giving rights to the people of Guyana.
But you know, Comrade Leader, when we talk about Linden, Forbes, Sampson, the man, we've got to be able to allow our viewers to note too that it was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham that we had the co-op system established. It was under Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham that we had the nationalization of many of our industries. It was under the very same Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham, where we had all these the credit unions established, and that in itself was a way of making the small man a real man.
Yeah, that is true. You know, I want to respond to something that Freddie Kissoon said. I don't know, I was at university lecture, he doesn't read. But when he said that Burnham put Republic Day because of his birthday, I want him to go to the parliamentary records and read. And he will see that in declaring the Republic, Burnham said, I am accepting a proposal of Dr. Jagan, who had raised recognizing 1763 and proceeded to recognize 1763 by Republic Day. You know, these people talk so much garbage. I saw one of them saying that the colors of our national flag was, he used to be the head of GBTI at one time. When the people came about in 1992, he said the colors of the national flag was a reflection of Burnham and the PNC trying to get similar colors. First of all, there was a competition. And the competition didn't start under Burnham. The process started under the History and Arts Council preparing for independence under Dr. Jagan. And then a design was done and two colors that weren't present, none of which are the PNC colors, were added. If I recall, it is white, river and water potential, and it might be gold, the mineral wealth. So these chaps just try to revise history. They don't pay attention to. And were they reading, they would have known that it is not a Guyanese that actually developed it. It was an American artist, but it was an open competition. So a lot of times these people talk, the racism affects them so much that they interweave fallacy to make it look as if it was a racial something when it wasn't. And I wanted to put out the truth there about the national flag, because I'm seeing here and there, it is emerging by some people trying to say it was a reflection of the African liberation colors and it was a reflection of the PNC colors. Totally untrue. And I hope I set the record straight.
Well, you know, Comrade Leader, we're going to have to always ponder this because, like you said, we can't erase the fact. But if we were to talk about Burnham, LFS Burnham, the international man, the Caribbean man, I'm sure many of our viewers, they still don't know when anything really about Burnham in terms of his role on the international scene. Not what we have now. People can't pronounce words, and the international embarrassment that is being caused to us. So we have to talk about this. Burnham, the international man, and the Burnham, the Caribbean man slash the international man.
Forbes Burnham was extremely good at the international level. But let us be clear, it's not only solely a function of him. One of the significant difference between Burnham in foreign policy and the present apparatus is that Burnham employed the best and the brightest, regardless of ethnicity, in the foreign ministry. And so the foreign ministry had a very good support staff. The likes of Lloyd Sewar, the likes of Dr. Barton Scotland, Ronald Austin, um, Rudy Collins, just to name a few. When you Rashley Jackson, to Sridat Ramphal, when you travel in those days, you felt respected. I recall my first visit to the United Nations in the 80s. When you arrived at the UN, people sought Guyana for advice. And even though you went as a little newcomer, the respect trickled down to you. Now, Burnham was a very capable person in international relations. I always say this to people, and I had to respond to the PPP and Paul Tennessee on this. Burnham had opposed what was happening in Caracas and what was happening with Cuba. And Burnham made it very clear that at that stage he couldn't support them because they had left-wing military type organization in their country. And at the time, that kind of warfare was of a concern. The minute Cuba renounced what was called the export of revolution, and the world changed, and there was a rapprochement between the USSR and the USA, Burnham led the Caribbean to recognize China and Cuba, which lasts until today, at a time when many people were afraid to do it. Burnham, in a very complex international environment, developed an approach of non-alignment, in which he said we will be pawns of neither East nor West. Of course, neither East nor West liked it, and so you were sandwiched in between. But probably one of the Burnham most significant thing in the international world is the way he promoted African and other liberation movements to ensure that there were more countries coming into the UN system that were liberated, and those people at least obtained political independence. As a poor country, Burnham in the 70s gave 50,000 US dollars to the liberation movement. It was criticized by Dr. Jagan, but he did it nevertheless because he understood at the time that people who are in bondage anywhere will affect we who had political independence. And so he developed a comprehensive approach to this whole question of the liberation of third world countries. He was critical in promoting South-South cooperation. You know, everybody talking about BRICS, which is a reasonably good initiative. But people forget that Burnham and others, the likes of Nyerere, advocated for what was called South-South cooperation, that small and little mid-level countries should cooperate among themselves to develop themselves and therefore remove the vulnerabilities that exist as it relates to the big powers. South-South cooperation began Nothing in international relation achieves its objective overnight, except you're going by war. And even after that, you don't achieve your objectives that we've seen from many of the wars in the world. But Burnham showed this ability to understand the international environment and to develop diplomatic strategies. You know, I saw a dumb one named, I don't remember his name now, but I'll remember it. But he wrote on environment and sought to suggest that it was the coming of the PPP in 1992 that the environment became in focus.
Ouch.
And I had to remind those while he was talking. He named Lamish Rupnarain or something like that. I don't remember his name now. But the Guyana Constitution of 1980 spoke directly to the environment. Under Burnham, there was a reforestation program. When you cut down trees, you sought to plant trees. Burnham recognized this importance and significance of the environment and had it placed in the Constitution. And long before the PPP came to power in 1992, the PNC under Burnham and after were pursuing the issues of the environment in international relations. And I can speak to this because I was one of the negotiators of the Biodiversity Convention. I was one of the negotiations in Agenda 21, all of which Guyana played a significant role. I can tell you that when you look at all of those documents, you will see something called small island states and low-lying coastal developing countries. That was a direct initiative of Guyana, in which we felt, one, if you had only island states, it would have divided the Caribbean. And two, that low-lying states like Guyana had similar problems like island states. And therefore, we should talk about small island states and low-lying developing country. And that language is in the documentation as a result of Burnham's first commitment on the issue. And then on the height, our commitment to ensuring that they develop an international framework that caters to countries like Guyana. So when they come talking, and the only problem I have with the low carbon development strategy is that it seems to be purely transactional. When there are other elements, I now see, after my criticisms in Parliament over the years, they are now talking about biodiversity. And I welcome that. But it cannot erase Burnham and the PNC role in helping develop the kind of framework that exists for the environment.
And so I know that our time is catching up on us, but while we speak about Burnham, the man, we have to ensure that we remind and we educate that Burnham was one of the founder members of CARICOM, the same CARICOM that we see other people flouncing themselves at now and thinking that, oh, CARICOM was established in 1992 and oh, CARICOM this and oh, they can do this. It was LFS Burnham and three others who were there as founder members.
To go to CARICOM without going to CARIFTA, which he participated in
yes.
Dickinson Bay in 1965, I think it was. Now, people forget. First, you had Caribbean Federation, which the PPP, Dr. Jagan, was up against and stayed out while we were calling for Caribbean unity. People, they remember conveniently. They don't want to remember that Dr. Jagan did not want us in a Caribbean Federation. It is Burnham who pushed for CARIFTA, and then in 1973, I think it was, CARICOM. While CARICOM would have had its mistakes, there is still scope for development in CARICOM. And I just hope that more visionary leaders emerge that allow us to carve out a Caribbean unified destiny, which will redound to our benefit. We've seen the dangers of all of us taking separate foreign policy positions. And Burnham, it's not by accident that Caribbean people voted Burnham as the Caribbean man of the 20th
Century.
century. It is because of his significant contribution to Caribbean development, CARIFESTA, which they continue to be involved in, though in a low-key fashion, was a Burnham idea. The first Caribbean Festival of Arts was held in Guyana in 1972. A lot of people seem not to know that Festival City got its name because Burnham built those houses for Guyanese, but before Guyanese moved into them, it housed the people who came for CARIFESTA. And it left with the name Festival City. You know, a lot of times when they are talking, Burnham paid careful attention to workers, did things for them. Stevedore Housing Scheme was a housing scheme created by Burnham for poor stevedores. Tocqueville. People, a lot of Guyanese do not know. Tocqueville really is Trade Union Congressville.
Yes.
It uses the abbreviation of Trade Union Congress, and it became Tocqueville. And it became Tocqueville because it was built for workers in the trade union movement. The PPP and them cannot show anything that they did that would have impact workers in the way the things that Burnham did, including NIS, to impact workers. So I am one who accept that Burnham made mistakes. I will accept that certain things should have been done differently. But I also know as a fact that his contributions to Guyana were extremely significant, continue to be significant. They criticized the Demerara Harbor Bridge. In fact, they became so vulgar. They went on a radio program, PPP People, and said Burnham should name it Viola Passage. You know, they were that vulgar. And then they begin, when it was clear that this bridge will link West Demerara and East Demerara, they didn't have the decency to admit it. They just use it and progress. Having criticized building a floating bridge, they then went and built one in Berbice. It's the nature of the beast we're talking about. And then have the audacity to say they built the first high-span bridge. I had to remind them that significantly, without oil money, what Burnham did, he built two key bridges at the same time. In 1978, Independence Day, we opened the Kanji Bridge, which is the first high-span bridge. The same year, on the 2nd of July, we opened the Demerara Harbor Bridge. Without oil money, with proper management, we built two significant bridges. And you know, one of the things about the projects under Burnham, they met their deadline.
Yep.
Something that doesn't happen now. So all I would say to PNC supporters and members and to the wider society, we have a great legacy. It's for us to promote it, teach our children, and let them know what the reality is.
Well, you know, Comrade Leader, before we go, I must let our viewers know that it was under Burnham that we had the the Kalai bicycle. Kalai, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The bicycle,
Kala, K-L-Y. If I
the
remember,
bicycle
I
assembly
think it's
plant.
K-L-Y. Mhm.
It was on the Burnham that we had the soap factory. It was on the Burnham that we have the tapirs being assembled here. Well, I know quite a lot of them wouldn't know what is a tapir. I'm sorry that I don't have a picture there to show. We had the GPC, Guyana Pharmaceutical Corporation. We had Gynec. We had the Sonata textile mill that Jagdio took and gave to his friend. That was Burnham, and it was from there we got our clothing to make our school uniform.
You left out
We got,
some key ones.
we had the glass factory, we had the clear big factory, and so these are all information that we must put out there so that we don't have the craziness happening there. Oh, Burnham banned flour. Oh, Burnham banned potato. Oh, Burnham banned split peas, and all the kinds of nonsense. And we just fail to give recognition where recognition is due. It was under Burnham that we got the holidays. When we had other holidays, it was under Burnham who was able to establish and make national Pagua and Diwali. So when you talk about, oh, Burnham was a racist and Burnham was a racist, and you have the facts there to show, again, the PPP, they don't have the decency after they would have spilled a whole lot of trash to come out there to admit the facts.
Probably the worst thing they did was spread a rumor across the country and the world that Burnham was the fifth richest black man in the world. Up until now, they can't show no evidence. The wealth that these here amass in 4 and 5 years and 10 years, Burnham spent many years as a president, 21 years to be precise, as head of the country. And he did not amass wealth. So when they're talking, he has to be seen as, when it comes to the resources of this country, a man of integrity who would have had the opportunity but did not steal Guyana money. He never ran a kleptocracy. He ran a government that sought to deliver goods and services to the ordinary people in Guyana.
As a
And
matter of
that's a reality.
as a matter of fact, I want to close by saying, if you were to check the ministers who served under Forbes Burnham's government, you would recognize that many of them did not even have their own homes. And those who had homes, they had very modest homes. Unlike what we are seeing now, all these mansions being built in less than 5 years, all these apartment buildings being built both locally and overseas. And then you hear people talk about their mansions were built from hard, honest earnings, and those who sold chocolate and cell phones and so
You
on.
could sell chocolate till the good Lord comes, and you can't build with that.
And it is
I've
quite,
challenged. I've been challenging them to put their wealth against the legal earnings, and let's see.
yeah, and it's so disgusting when there were policies that were implemented under the PNC. They cussed them out. As a matter of fact, I can vividly remember the plantain chips that David Arthur Granger was talking about, and they cussed that out. And it's surprising now that they are promoting the plantain chips industry. But again, that's the beast we're talking about. The shameless group of people, the people who don't put people first. Comrade Leader, I want to thank you so much for being here with us. I know that we're
Thanks for
running
having
over
me.
Sherrod's time. I want to thank you for being here with us. But I want to put you on notice that we can't stop here on this discussion with this visionary leader, this leader who instilled purpose and pride not only in himself but in us as Guyanese. And we just fall short of talking about what catered for our young people, the Guyana National Service. But we'll have to talk some more about that, because this was a man of vision. This was a man who cared about his people. This was a man who was putting his people first, unlike those who we have now. But again, it was Burnham again who whose idea it was to have the President's College School of Excellence established. And I want to throw out a challenge to Sonia, because I'm hearing Sonia, the Minister of Education, saying she was a student of President's College. My challenge to you, Sonia, is to make President's College what it was then when you were there. And you see, President's College now, we don't want to talk a lot about it, but President's College, the School of Excellence under Burnham, will continue to be a threat to the PPP government. Every institution organized under Burnham will continue to be a threat to the PPP government. And so 40 years after his death, they still go out there, like some folks would say, labadooshing their mouths with a whole lot of filth about LFS Burnham. They just can't get him off of their mind, because this was the man. And sometimes you wish if Burnham were alive at this stage today, yesterday, day before yesterday, at 103 years old, where this country would have been. We probably would have been surpassing China and all of those places, because the man had a vision. So again, Comrade Leader, I want to thank you so much for being with us.
To serve my country, yeah, yeah, Guyana, oh, Guyana, I want to serve my country, Guyana, beautiful, happy and free, Guyana, let's cooperate with our government to help develop Guyana the free. Together, my comrades, we will build out new Guyana, a country where all have equal opportunity. So let us begin now to show loyalty to Guyana by showing love and respect for all Guyanese. My brother, my sisters, we will live and die here together. Our motto, one people, one nation, one destiny for harmonious living. Cooperation will Guyanese. Will it time we settle all the rich land in the interior? Our natural resources are there in great quantity, and we will do farming and establish towns by the border. My greatest desire is to serve my country, Guyana, and sincerely help my Guyana to move along. Our government asks us that we study hard and we learn the things that will help Guyana to become strong and great and free. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Guyana, I want to serve my country, Guyana, and sincerely help my Guyana to move along. Our government asks us that we study hard and we learn the things that will help Guyana to become strong and great and free. Oh yeah, Guyana. Guyana, Guyana, I want to serve my country, Guyana, and sincerely help my Guyana to move along. Our government asks us that we study hard and we learn the things that will help Guyana to become strong great and free.